What's up, YouTube? Rahubat Usra. We're gonna get into Anu and the Egyptian ancestors. Who are the Egyptian ancestors, pretty much? All right, and we're gonna dive right into it. I'm gonna read from this website. I'll leave the link in the description for anybody who wants to cross-examine the information of what any particular scholar is saying from the references that I'm saying, or I'm about to read from. So do your own research because all of these scholars are not 100% correct. So nobody's 100% correct. It's all about building on information. So let's get this started. The Hall of Records, The Hidden Secrets of the Pyramid and Sphinx, written in 1980. And I quote, "The civilization called Egyptian in our period developed for a long time in its early cradle. The cycle of civilization, the longest in history, presumably lasted 10,000 years. This is a reasonable compromise between the long chronology, right, based on data provided by Manetho, the last student of the ancient Egyptian mystery school of Yaanuwn at Alexandria before it was invaded by Alexander the Great in 330 BCE, which places the beginning at 17,000 BCE, and the short chronology 3100 BCE of the moderns. For the latter are the obliged to admit that by 4245 BCE, the Egyptians had already invented the calendar. So Sheikh Anta Diop, The African Origins of Civilization, Myth or Reality. Originally published Nations Negras at ET Culture. 1955, published in English in 1974. All of these are books. Go check them all out. I quote, "In this chapter, I hope to demonstrate that the origins of the civilization of Egypt, or Kim, was black African, specifically Ethiopian or Anu. The history of black will remain suspended in air and cannot be written correctly until African historians dare connect it with the history of Egypt. In reviewing Egypt's beginnings, we find an advanced civilization already intact from the earliest dynasty. The fact has perplexed historians down through the ages. Common sense dictates that if Egypt began fully mature, then its civilization must have originated elsewhere. The father of history, Herodotus, was told that the first man to rule Egypt was Men, who lived so long ago that Egypt was still underwater. In Men's time, the whole country, except the district around Thebes, was marsh. None of the land below Lake Moeris was then showing above water. To this place from the sea is 7 days' passage up the river." Now, if you don't know who Sheikh Anta Diop is, you should get familiar with his work. He is a scholar and he's a scientist, a very wise man, and someone you should take heed to. Now, let's continue. Wayne Chandler, Of Gods and Men, Egypt Old Kingdom, 1989. And I quote, "According to Finders Petrie, these people were the Anu, whose name, known to us since the prehistoric epoch, is always written with 3 pillars on the few inscriptions extant from the end of the 4th millennium before our era. These 3 pillars are written in cuneiform. Anyone can Google this and look these pillars up. The natives of the country are always represented with unmistakably chiefly emblems for which one looks in vain among the infrequent portrayals of other races, who are all shown as servile foreign elements having reached the valley by infiltration. Terra Netta and the Scorpion King, whom Petrie wrongly groups together. The Scorpion King belonged to the preceding race of Anu. Moreover, he worshipped Men and Set. As we shall see later, Men, like the chief gods of Egypt, was called the tradition of Egypt itself, the Great Negro. The Palermo stone is Egypt's oldest history book, revealing to us information on the early kings of Egypt, along with the mystical kings prior to the dynastic era. This fragment of a 5th century Balsart stele was doubtless one of the documents that Manetho used to compile his history of Egypt. The king list covers the period from the Old Kingdom back thousands of years into the pre-dynastic period. It chronicles these mythical kings until the time of the god Horus, who is said to have given the throne to the human king Menes. Other interesting information recorded by the Palermo stone is the construction of a stone building called Men Nigeret, 2686 to 2667 BCE. Copper smelting and copper statues created in the 2nd dynasty, 2890 to 2686 BCE, and record of 40 ships that brought wood from an unknown region outside of Egypt during the reign of Sneferu, describing military expeditions such as campaigns in Nubia that resulted in the capture of 7,000 slaves that probably resulted in the disappearance of the local Nubian culture. Alan Winston, The Palermo Stone, 1999. More evidence comes from the Book of Thoth. It describes one of the pyramids as standing upon the seashore, the waves of which dash in powerless fury against its base. They add that from them Ethiopians who built the pyramids, as from their authors and ancestors, the Egyptians get most of their laws. It is from them that the Egyptians have learned to honor kings and gods and bury them with such pomp. Sculpture and writing were invented by the Ethiopians. The Ethiopians cite evidence that they are more ancient than the Egyptians. The most complete list of Egyptians kings known appeared in the Royal Papyrus of Turin, which assigned in order of dynasty the names of over 130 kings. Manetho named over 100 kings and divided them into 30 dynasties. The two most complete versions of this list are those quoted by Julius Africanus and by Eusebius. According to Julius Africanus, 561 kings reigned from approximately 5,524 years in total. Eusebius, on the other hand, states that 361 kings ruled in 4,780 years. Sheikh Anta Diop, Egyptologist, linguist, physicist, and historian, allows 10,000 years for the cycle of Egyptian civilization. His logic is pure and simple and hard to refute. The Egyptians' calendar was based on a cycle of the star Sirius, whose rise coincides with the sun every 1,461 years. Now, many astronomers will verify the fact that it takes thousands of years to study the stellar movement of celestial bodies before one may acquire information accurate enough to develop a calendar, right? Thus, if the Egyptians had the calendar in 4,245 BCE, and it took the passages of several thousand years to amass enough data to create it, then it is only rational that we adhere to the logic of Professor Diop. Diop goes on to say the official date adopted until now for no special reason wavers between 3100 BCE and 3000 BCE. In actual fact, the choice of 3100 BCE results from no necessity but that of synchronizing Egyptian and Mesopotamian chronology. Now I want to pause on that point there and elaborate. Because as you can see, a lot of Egyptology and a lot of Egypt history has been synchronized with not only Sumerian history, but that of many cultures around Africa and the diaspora. All right, but as you can see, we've always ran parallel with these titles, such as Yaanuwn. It does not have its origins in Sumeria. It is actually older, and it is pre-dynastic Egypt, as you can see the evidence is pointing to here. So Yaanuwn actually predates titles like Egyptian, Mesopotamia, and Sumeria, and these people that we try to apply the term to. Okay, when you break the word down, you get Anunnaki, right? And if you know this, then the Anunnaki should not be foreign to your mind. Even when I say Anu or Anunnaki, I am making reference to many tribes across Africa. However, the Anu would be pertaining to a particular bloodline, a royal bloodline. Okay, now let's continue. Wayne Chandler of Gods and Men, Egypt, Old Kingdom, 1989. The Ethiopians say that the Egyptians are one of their colonies which was brought into Egypt by Osiris. They claim that at the beginning of the world, Egypt was simply a sea, but that the Nile, carrying down vast quantities of loam from Ethiopia and its floodwaters, finally filled it in and made it part of the continent. I not only believe the people who gave me this account of Egypt, but my own conclusions strongly support what they said. In that same book, Wayne Chandler goes on to say, the common ancestor of the Anu settled along the Nile was Ani or An, a name determined by the word Ket, in which, dating from the earliest versions of the Book of the Dead, 4100 BCE onwards, is given to the god Osiris. The identity of the god An with Osiris has been demonstrated by Platy. We should indeed recall that Osiris is also surnamed by the Anu. Osiris Ani. The god Anu is represented alternatively by the symbol and the symbol. Are the Anuak tribes now inhabiting the Upper Nile in Ethiopia related to the ancient Anu? Future research will provide the answer to this question. Now, according to my own research and what I've came across in Nuwaubu, the statement that the guy makes is absolutely true. The Anuak tribes, they are a part and descendants of the ancient Egyptians, and a lot of their culture run parallel with the Dogon. They are also descendants of the ancient Egyptians. A lot of us here in America, we are also descendants of the ancient Egyptians. A lot of tribes in South America, North America, and many other places, we are descendants of the ancient Egyptians. And it sounds like there are many, but it's really not. It's really a slim amount, and it's very complex for us to identify these because we cannot just look back in history and think everything is black and everything is ancient, so it must pertain to us as a culture. Not only are the history of these matters very complex, but also the science of these matters are very complex. The genetics of these matters are very complex. The linguistics, the symbolism, the list goes on. And in Nuwaubu, we try to address each of these areas using research methodology with all of these things combined. Then and only then can you produce facts beyond reasonable doubt. Now, also, you have to understand in this research, there are agendas, okay? And you have to have an ability to reason through these facts and understand that some things will not be said purposely and some things are not said because they are not understood. There is a difference. Now, let me address Anu and the Anunnaki being flesh-eating reptilian beings. Now, first you have to understand that there's many ways to interpret this. And because our people use their religious ideology for our moral conduct, this can be dangerous. We could be calling on the wrong ancestors or interpreting something the wrong way. Okay, so with the Anunnaki, it's always been understood in the Nuwaubu that there are agreeable and disagreeable. So you get those who fell down, the Anunnaki, Nephilim, and then you get those who were sent from Anu, the Anunnaki Elohim. But anytime we're talking about flesh-eating beings, we have to put it in perspective, okay? We have to apply our reason and our logic to, make it a reality. So flesh-eating beings, we know there are people today that exist, a reality of people who eat human beings. And not only human beings, but the flesh of animals also. Things you would not do if you were in your right mind, okay? And we never did these things. We never took their symbols and tried to make them good or anything like that. We had our own symbols. We didn't have to take anything from our adversaries or from our enemies. So they would take our symbols, and they would turn them evil. They would take our ancestors and they would make them evil somehow. Now, why would they do this? It was simple, because one nation's rise meant another nation's fall. So a lot of times they would take the ancestors or the symbols of the other nation or the opposing nations of which they conquered, and they would completely demonize them or use them for complete mockery. And you could be calling on tones of demons. At the same time, they are telling you that your ancestors are the demons. So research into that and look into that. That's very important. And this is just to verify and clarify who Anu is, okay, who the Anunnaki are, and who the Anuak tribe, etc., based on outside information before I even bring you back into Nuwaubu, who is very heavy on the Anunnaki and Anu as the ancestors. Now, we're talking about a cultivating tribe of people who cultivated the world. We're talking about a pure seed, all right, who has children. There are bloodlines. There are also serpent seeds. Okay, we have a disagreeable brother, which I'll get into probably on further videos. But this one here, I want to particularly focus on the Anu or the Anunnaki. Now, there could possibly be one alternative to the Anunnaki being flesh-eating beings, and that is basically based off the word and the meaning when you break it down, Anunnaki, and that is the rays of the sun coming down. Okay, so those rays of the sun could burn people, metaphorically speaking, and metaphysically speaking. If we want to say that Anunnaki are flesh-eating beings, it could mean that the rays of the sun will cause some type of skin damage. But understand that the flesh exists beneath the skin. So either we're talking about something internal that will eat the flesh up, or we are talking about something that will penetrate the skin, eventually reaching the flesh to eat that up as well. But even in that sense, the Anunnaki returning will correspond with the return of the sun cycle. Okay, these two things will go hand in hand. It is not to be demonized to say our ancestors are somehow flesh-eating reptilian beings. Okay, because out of the eyes of which perception is this statement made? That's very key and that's very important. As I said earlier, our rise is their fall. So you can easily be making a statement made by your adversary. But let's continue on with the Anu. So Wayne Chandler of Gods and Men, Egypt's Old Kingdom, 1989. Colin is sent out by the Ethiopians. Osiris, who was also Anu now, having been the leader of the colony, Osiris gathered together a great army with the intention of visiting all the inhabited lands and teaching the race of men how to cultivate. For he supposed that if he made men give up their savagery and adopt a gentle manner of life, he would receive immortal honors. They were the earliest and say that the proof of this are clear, that they did not arrive as immigrants but are the natives of the country and therefore rightly are likely to be the first engendered by the earth is obvious to all. They further write that it was among them that people were first taught to honor the gods and offer sacrifices and arrange processions and festivals and perform other things by which people honor the divine. For this reason, their piety is famous among all men, and their sacrifices among the Ethiopians are believed to be particularly pleasing to the divinity. So as you can see here, this is about the divine, this is about being humble, and Anu is associated with that. Nothing about some type of evilness, all right, or demonic forces. Sheikh Anta Diop, Origins of the Ancient Egyptians, 1981. And Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was mighty in words and in deeds. Acts chapter 7:22. So before Moses wrote the 5 books of the Bible, he had first learned all the wisdom of the Egyptians. What did the Egyptians teach? I quote, "He who was between the thighs of Nut, goddess of sky and heaven, is the pygmy who danced like the god and who pleased the heart of the god before his great throne." Pyramid text of Pepi, 1-6 dynasty, 2300 BCE, the high priest Terra-Netta of the temples of god Seth of the cities of the Anu peoples. Inscription on Terra-Netta tile dating around 3100 BCE at a temple at Abadju, Ibidos, and Ta Seti. Thou hast said in thy letter that thou hast brought a dancing dwarf of the god from the land of spirits, like the dwarf which the treasure of the god birded. Chancellor of the divine seals of king, brought from Punt in the time of Esi. Come northward to the court immediately. Thou shalt bring this dwarf with thee, which thou bringest living, prosperous and healthy, from the land of spirits, from the dances of the god, to rejoice and gladden the heart of the king of Upper and Lower Egypt. Nefertiti, who lives forever, my majesty desires to see this dwarf more than the gifts of Sinai and of Punt. If thou arrived at court, this dwarf being with thee alive, prosperous and healthy, my majesty will do for thee a greater thing than that which was done for the treasurer of the god birded in the time of Assesi, according to the heart's desire of my majesty to see the dwarf. Now this dwarf is the pygmy dwarf, of course. So when we are making reference to the Anu, we're making reference to pygmies. Bring us right into the Ptahaites in the ancient Egyptians. When I say the ancient Egyptians, I do not necessarily mean the modern day Egyptians or what you've known to be the Egyptians. Rather, the tribes and cultures of some of these tribes, as well as Nuwaubu, so we can pull out the significance in Anu, Ilion, Ilion El, and see that the message has always correlated with the ancient Egyptians and a lot of tribes across the world that still identify with the symbols and the practices of the ancient Egyptians. Also, a lot of early black Muslims, a lot of ancient Hebrews of America, a lot of tribes of America such as the Navajo and the Yamasees for Ethiopia. The list goes on. Many cultures have fragments of the holiest truth, but according to historical fact, Anu was there from the beginning. And according to scripture, Anu is the Most High. Wadu.